Hello. Today's lecture will be about typical essay structure. So hopefully this is a review for you. If not, please be sure to take some notes. I'm going to give you some notes on my handy dandy board. The first thing when we think about essays is the title. Sometimes I title my works after I write the essay, but an interesting title is going to be the first eye-catching, engaging thing that you do for the reader. So you want to make sure that you're titling all of your work and make sure it's creative. The next thing you want to think about is the structure of the introduction. So there's a couple of different ways you can introduce material. So let's write down here. Some of you might have heard of like a hook statement or introductory statement where you use an interesting quote, an interesting fact or statistic. You might use an anecdote or a scenario. Now, the difference between anecdote and scenario is an anecdote is a story that you're telling that's true, or something that happened to you, or something that happened to a friend. Whereas a scenario is something made up, like a hypothetical, imagine if type of situation. So if you're writing a paper or a speech, let's say, on more strict gun control laws, you might do a scenario or an anecdote about someone who was shot mistakenly. Okay. If it were an anecdote, it would be someone you know or a story of a friend of yours. If it were a scenario, it would be something you're making up in order to make your audience feel something, right? We want to make our audience feel something in order for them to listen and change their mind. So there are a couple different ways you can do the hook, okay? Um, just to remind you, it's quote, interesting fact or statistic, scenario, anecdote. You might have other ideas that you learned in high school about how to hook your audience. Those are just a few. The next thing you want to do is give a preview of your paper. The preview of your paper is like the movie trailer for your paper. When you watch a movie trailer, you get an overview of what the movie's about, but you don't get every single thing going on. You might get an idea of the conflict. You might get an idea of the main points in the movie. But the trailer is specifically built so that you are interested in watching the movie, right? So for your introduction, you want to specifically build the preview to entice the reader to read more. Okay. So you want to pick some creative, interesting things that are going to engage the reader. The preview kind of narrows down from more generic statements to a specific thesis statement. And I'm assuming you all know what that means. Most of you had a really great thesis statement for your diagnostic. Thesis statement is basically the topic sentence of your whole paper, and it includes the topic of your paper and how you're going to argue it. So it's not just the topic, it's also including the how part. Okay. For students that get stuck on thesis, I will recommend just sticking in a because, and usually that helps you expand your ideas. The thesis statement is like the cap on the paper. All of the topic sentences that follow relate back to the thesis statement. So I should be able to draw an arrow from your topic sentences back up to the thesis statement, and they should directly relate to it. Okay. Now, after your introduction comes the body, of course. And in a good body paragraph, we have, whoops, my board is still a little wet there. Okay. In the body, you begin, of course, with a topic sentence. The topic sentence is going to limit what your paragraph can be about. So if you have a sentence in your paper and I say not related to topic sentence or work on content related to topic sentence, that means that you had a topic sentence, but the content of your paragraph may have strayed from that particular statement. So make sure your topic sentence encapsulates everything that you want to say in your paragraph. The other thing to keep in mind is for topic sentences, you may also use transitionary words to transition between ideas. So simple words like next or secondly, of course, are transitions, but you might also use statements like not only blah, 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 and kind of give a little summary of the paragraph above, but also blah, 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 the next paragraph. Okay. So the beginning of every body paragraph is going to be a transition statement or a topic sentence, but these two things go hand in hand. The next thing is clarifying details. Clarifying details are more generic statements that give specific guidance off of your topic sentence. And then the completing details are where you give your evidence and examples. So that might be quotes, that might be anecdotes. We'll talk about different types of evidence in another lecture. Sometimes clarifying and completing details can be paired together in one sentence. Other times you're going to have a clarifying detail and then you'll follow up with an example or you'll follow up with citing some research. Okay. The last thing in your body paragraphs is a conclusion or a second transition into the next idea for each body paragraph. And you can repeat this pattern as much as you want in the paragraph as long as all of it relates to the topic sentence. So you may have 3 clarifying details that have 4 completing details. You might have 1 clarifying detail that has 4 completing details matching it and supporting it. It really just depends on the points you're making. A lot of times when we're talking about very specific things in our topic sentences, we might have 1 clarifying statement and then really dive into giving completing details, which would be the evidence and examples. Now remember, with the completing details, you want to explain the connection between those completing details and those clarifying details. All right, and then finally, we have the conclusion. And the conclusion, I think, is one of the hardest things in the writing process because it can be a little bit repetitive where you are, the conclusion is a repeat, right? You're reviewing your main points in a conclusion. So you have to be creative with the language because you are repeating basically the structure of your paragraph. Think about listening to a speech. Most speakers, when they're finished with certain points or when they're finishing up the speech, they give like a wrap up. Think about in church, your pastor or your priest or your reverend, whoever, whatever spiritual leader you may have, usually wraps up with some sort of prayer or some sort of statement that encapsulates everything that was in the lecture or the speech. So as a writer, you also want to do that, right? In the conclusion, the first thing you want to do is restate the thesis. That does not mean repeat the thesis word for word. That means tell me your thesis again in different language, okay? Because you want to remind your reader of where you started from, right? Your paper gets more specific, your paper expands on ideas, but in the conclusion, you want to remind the reader, remember, this was our main vein of thought, okay? Then an opposite of a preview is a review. So you're going to make sure you're reviewing your main points. Same as in like a politician's speech, for example. They might end their speech with a review of their thoughts on healthcare, their thoughts on education, their thoughts on military, right? To give you a bulleted review of their points. Okay. And then the last thing, you don't just want to let your reader go with reviewing main points. That's boring. You want to leave them thinking. So you might ask a compelling question. not something like, now, what do you think about this? You want to ask an academic question that is going to encourage your reader to pursue more inquiry after reading your information. So you want to engage your reader one more time. Kind of the same thing as the hook. You want to hook your reader right at the end so that they continue thinking about the content of your paper. You might give another scenario or anecdote. We call this a clincher statement. It doesn't have to be just one sentence, but the clincher statement grabs, like the clinchers of a lobster or a crab, grabs the audience one more time. Okay? So this is going to be the structure of the conclusion. All right, now, like I said, you're going to want to pick a creative title, and sometimes that comes after writing your paper and you kind of see the thing as a whole, and then you're able to label it as a whole. Um, Structure is really important in academic writing. It shows intellectual development and commitment to a certain topic. It also shows that you're able to balance your own ideas with other people's. So you have your own ideas, but you also have research. It shows that you can follow a logical argument from point A, point B, point C. The transitionary language is going to show your ability to combine maybe different points and how those combinations come together smoothly. So, as an academic, it's really important to organize your writing. And we've talked about the writing process before, but outlining your ideas like we did here, except you would add in your content, is one of the most important ways to stay on the right track, stay focused, make sure you have very specific information to support your ideas, and making sure everything relates back to your thesis statement. So that's our content lecture on like a review of essay structure, and I'll see you again soon.